Okay. So now we get to the fun part of the evening, and I'd like to introduce our guests as we explore the challenge and fulfillment of pilots and Paws, flights to forever homes. Let's welcome Susan Delgado.
Hi there.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen here. Great, pilotsandpaws.org. We also tag ourselves these days as PNP, so you'll see that throughout the website. I'll take you through a little bit about the organization, what you need to know about a pilot, how it works, and then answer any questions you guys might have. I've been doing Pilots and Paws for the last 10 to 12 years or so, both on the East Coast and then the last couple years here in California in the Bay Area. So I've got lots of experience of what it takes to do this. So let's see if we can get my slides going to the next one. So here's what our website looks like. I'll talk a little bit about some of these buttons here at the bottom, but it's pretty intuitive. The website is really focused on getting the rescues and the people who need the transports and the pilots connected. There is a lot of other information in here, and there's ongoing information about recent flights and things like that to get you inspired. But there's also the main purpose is really the forum and making sure that we can connect those that need the help with those pilots that want to offer the help. Pilots and Paws is a 501c3 organization. So you're volunteering as a pilot all of your time and expenses. Pilots and Paws will provide some crates and some other things and some goodies once you sign up if you're interested in these kinds of things. Shirts and hats and crates and things like that. But everything else is really, as from a donation perspective. So let's jump into what Pilots and Paws is and how this all got started back in 2008. It's kind of an interesting story because Debbie and John, they were actually at a motorhome gathering in South Carolina, and Debbie, who was responsible for the Doberman rescue of South Carolina, was just chit-chatting with John about a dog in Florida that she was trying to get up to South Carolina. And John, who was a pilot, casually said, "I'll fly down tomorrow and pick up the dog for you." And the next day, Debbie's husband and John flew down to Florida, brought the Doberman back, and of course, eventually he found his forever home. So that was the very, very first transport of Pilots and Paws. Debbie and John got talking about, wow, is something other pilots would be willing to do? And of course, John said, yes, we'd love to go flying for any reason. So that's when the idea in Pilots and Paws was born. The website was really one of the first things that got started to help connect the rescue groups. And so you may see when you go onto the website that in the Southeast US, there's a lot of activity. And some of that's because that's sort of where Pilots and Paws was born and has a lot of following, I guess, in the Southeast. And so it's grown from there. With the internet, and rescue groups can post dogs available for adoption. Anybody in the US can see those dogs and be interested. And so that has allowed, one, a lot of dogs, more animals to be adopted, but two, also this need to transport. And as many of you, if you're involved in animal rescue at all, you'll know that historically animals were transported through ground transport. And what that usually means is a driver drives the animal an hour and connects with another driver an hour and another driver an hour. And so what might be a 9-hour drive might have 9 or 10 drivers, when you could probably do that with 1 or 2 pilots in a lot shorter period of time, and a lot easier on the animals as well. So to date, roughly, there are about 6,000 pilots that are listed on our website. Canada came on board in 2012. And so we've been growing ever since 2008. I think that number was 5,000 not that long ago. So exciting to see the growth. I'm gonna try to play this. Hopefully you'll hear it just a little excerpt from
4 million former pets are euthanized in the United States every year because they don't have homes. Pilots and Paws is a national charity helping to change that. Working with rescue groups across the country, pilots donate their time and their planes to transport animals to places where they will be adopted. It's the goal of Pilots and Paws to make transport available for all rescued animals that have homes waiting for them, no matter where those homes are. To help put an end to pet overpopulation in our lifetime, please go to pilotsandpaws.org. 4 million.
Okay, so a little bit more about Pilots and Paws. Mostly you'll see on the website dogs and cats, although there have been a variety of different animals. There was a posting just a couple weeks ago here in the Bay Area for about 27 chickens that were rescued from a bad situation and were being transported. There's also been a couple situations on turtles up in the Northeast US where the turtles were hatched and it wasn't safe for them to stay in that area. And so they were moved from that beach to another beach further south, and a whole bunch of pilots went up and picked several thousand turtles up and transported them. As you heard, these numbers have actually gotten significantly better over the last 5 to 6 years. So right now they estimate 1.5 million animals are euthanized each year. But the good news is that 3.2 million are adopted. And I can tell you probably 4 or 5 years ago, that number was flipped, so that the euthanized number was more than double of the number of animals adopted. So I think the internet, people's willingness to adopt from shelters and our ability to transport them has all had an impact on that. The other thing that Pilots and Paws does in various locations around the US is work with spay-neuter programs, right? We know that this is one of the keys to reducing the population. Back when I lived in Georgia, there was a group of rescues that pooled their resources together and hired a retired veterinarian and bought a motorhome, and she went from county to county in rural Georgia to do free spay and neuters. So there's lots of folks working on that from a different angle as well. And to date, I would guess this number is probably low, 150,000 animals transported. And that's the ones that have been tracked on Pilots and Paws. What I've found is once I gain a relationship with a rescue, a lot of times they'll just call me on Friday afternoon and say, are you available this weekend? And so sometimes the rescues don't end up in Pilots and Paws because they're reaching out directly. So I'm sure that this number is much higher. I'm not the only one where that situation happens. So a little bit about how it works. If you're a pilot, you go onto their website and you register, and there's some basic information that you'll want to provide, or that you'll need to provide, and some things that you might want to provide. When you log into Pilots and Paws, you can set up a username. There's lots of usernames out there that mean nothing. And I used to have one, but it's really helpful. You won't know this at the beginning, but eventually you'll figure out that it's really helpful if your username is your actual name or some portion of that. I'll give you an example that I was coordinating a flight with another pilot, and we did that flight, and another one came up, and I wanted to reach out to that same pilot again, and I knew his name, and there's a way I can search in the website for his username, but not his real name. And so it was a little bit tricky. I eventually did find him and reach out to him, but it's helpful if it's your name, if you're comfortable with that. You'll include some information about yourself that will be on every post. You know, whatever you're comfortable with providing. Sometimes type of airplane, home base is really helpful here. Phone number if you're comfortable with providing that as well. Other information that's super helpful is if you're VFR or IFR. The rescues may not entirely understand that, at least not initially. They learn pretty quick what those things mean, but other pilots will understand what that means. Your type of airplane, any other limitations, maybe weekends only or weekdays only or those kinds of things. it just helps accelerate the connection of the rescue and their time frame and the pilots that can work with them in the same time frame. So I'll explain that a little bit more. Let's see what else we have here. Distance. So you'll be asked to provide a distance you're willing to fly, I think is how it's listed in the website. But what I would offer up is to provide a longer distance than you're actually willing to fly, because the notifications that you'll receive from the website will be based on this distance. So you'll receive information about requests for flights within that distance from your home base. So you may only be able to do part of a leg, let's just say from Los Angeles to Oregon, right? That's usually going to be split up between 2 or 3 or even 4 pilots. But if you limit your distance, then you might not see those via email. You can always see them going onto the website, but it's just something to think about. So I think I have in there 400 miles, but I've never flown 400 miles. You will receive notifications, like I said, based on this distance. So the rescues, I'll talk a little bit about the rescues and what information they put in, but they'll put in basically a zip code of the start and the finish of the leg that they're looking for. You can also, I'll show you also where you can go in and log in and just see the requests for flights. Okay. So just a little bit of what information is out there, and I know this is probably a pretty busy slide here, but there is a way where you can view all of the pilots, and you can zoom in on this. For example, I zoomed in over here on the right into the Bay Area, and when you keep zooming in, you can literally zoom into the airport, and you can see there are actually 4 here, 4 pilots based at San Jose International that are registered, right? What this helps with is sometimes we're looking for my example of a dog from Bakersfield, for example, that needs to go up to, let's say, Oregon. Maybe I'm willing to do the southern portion of that, but I'm looking for another pilot maybe to do the northern portion. And sometimes I'll reach out to pilots and ask them if they're available. And I can find them easily by where they're based this way. And you can email them. So over here on the left, you can see, you can send an email or a private message to any registered pilot. You can see here in my profile, my zip code, when I'm willing to foster, where I'm based, and then distance willing to fly 400. That's really to help with the notifications. Down here on the lower left, I have my signature. And then you can also see here when the person joined Pilots and Paws and how active they are. So what's nice about that is if you are looking for a pilot, you can see that maybe they accessed the website last week, or maybe they haven't accessed the website in 6 months. So maybe they're not that active on Pilots and Paws. You can see I joined here in October of 2008. So it's been a while. So going back to how it works, the rescue groups will post requests to the website. As I said, they will put in the starting zip code and the ending zip code. So a lot of times you'll have to interpret that and find the airport nearest and work with them on what airport might work best. You'll go on to the website, you'll see the request. I'll show you what one of those looks like, and you'll offer to fly the entire flight, part of a flight, whatever you might be able to offer. And like I said, here it's really helpful to fill in the gaps. Like I can only do it on Fridays and Saturdays or things like that. Some of the rescues, obviously they're working with volunteers as well and coordinating all of this. And so knowing what those parameters are is really helpful. Usually what happens is you'll post onto the website specific to a request. Maybe there will be a couple back and forths on the website. And then in most cases, the communication will go off out of the website onto either email or text or phone calls for that matter to really coordinate some of the details. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. As I mentioned, it might be a request to move one animal that might be 200 miles and maybe you're comfortable flying that 200 miles on your own. Or it might be you know, one animal that needs to go a very long distance. And so it might be 2 or 3 or 4 pilots potentially. Or it could be lots of animals and any combination, right? The rescues will provide information about the animal's size and those kinds of things, so you can gauge whether you think you can fit them in your airplane and those kinds of things. So I've done a lot of one animal, one pilot, and I've done several multiple animals, many pilots trips, and everything in between. So a little bit more just information once you get going, and these are sort of like lessons learned. Once you figure out that you can work it out, we're going to do this flight on Saturday. You know, everybody's really flexible. That's really important for everybody to be flexible as to timing, because we know things can happen. You'll exchange names and phone numbers. Make sure you get phone numbers for everybody. You know, often provide them with your N number. They've learned, a lot of the rescues know about FlightAware. They can track. That's really helpful for them. Provide a timeline. You know, I'm going to depart at 8 o'clock. I'll arrive at the airport at 9:30. We'll pick up the dog. Give yourself plenty of time to get fuel, taxi, exchange the dog, take some pictures, all those kinds of things. So build some cushion into your plan, especially when you're connecting with other pilots. That's always helpful. So everybody has a little cushion. Crate situation. Some dogs will come with crates. Some dogs will not come with crates. You can fly the dogs however you want. You can put them in crates, or some people tether the dogs. I personally don't. I've always created all of the animals that I've taken, including my own. But I'm usually flying single pilot. So I don't want there to be any risks, and it's a lot easier to clean a crate than it is to clean the airplane. And like I said, Pilots and Paws, once you join, you can email pilotsandpaws@gmail.com and provide them some information about your airplane and size and things like that. And they will send you a couple crates that are donated by PetMate. So that's one of our sponsors. Make sure you talk about where you're going to meet. Lots of times there's more than one FBO at the airport, so make sure you know where they know where that is and what it's called and how to find it. You got to remember, these are not pilots, these are animal rescue people. Some are familiar and some are not. I like to explain the weather if there's any risk of that having a factor on the transport, so that they can understand that there might be a go, no go decision, right? And ultimately that's got to be up to the pilots, as you guys probably all know. So if there's anything that's at risk because of weather, make sure that they understand that. We talk about when's the last point to make that go, no go decision. And especially if there's more than one pilot, right? You want to make sure that you're in communication on weather if there's any issues. And then last but not least, what I call exit strategy. And this is you never know what's going to happen when you get to your airplane in the morning. And you may drive up and find you have a flat tire on a Sunday and there's nobody around. Or whatever might happen. You might fire up your engine and find out that something isn't right. And so I like to really explain to the rescue groups that there's always a potential for something to happen in which the transport has to be canceled at any point in time. And so we like to talk about that and just make sure people understand and are flexible, and we work around that. Okay. All right, let's see. Let's go to something fun here. So last but not, this is where I'll show you a little bit about what it looks like. So this was a transport I did very recently. In the upper right left-hand corner here, you can see all these purple and green lines. And so you can actually go into the website and view flight requests, and you can actually do this even if you haven't signed up to be a pilot. So if you're just curious, you can go out there, view flight requests. You can filter the activity in the upper left-hand corner. You'll see here it says the last 7 days. It defaults to the last 3 days. I generally look 7 days back or 14 days back because somebody may have posted something and the transport still is not completed. And so you'll see all these purple being northbound, green being southbound. You can click on these lines and it'll bring up this information that I have here in the middle. So it'll bring up what the request is. In this case, this request is marked done because we moved this dog. But this was a situation where they're trying to move this Doberman from Sacramento, or sorry, from Sacramento down to Santa Paula. And so I offered to do sort of San Jose to Santa Paula, and I had a pilot run the dog over from Sacramento to San Jose. So you'll see there's a ton of information in here, who to call, the person responsible for the transport, those kinds of things, which is great because, like I said, a lot of times I'll text with them. You'll have all of this information. A lot of times there's a picture, which is always helpful, and then you can add to the bottom of this, and you can post a reply and say, you know, I could do this on Saturday or Sunday or whatever your situation is. Okay. So I'm going to show you this real quick. It is a little unnerving, but this is quick, and then I'll talk to you about my second transport ever. Liesel is here. She was. Oh wait, please.
Can you come here? Yeah, let's see.
She is wagging her tail, but you can see that unfortunately she has an injury.
It's just gone. Where did that leg go? Sure.
But she is still happy. You can see that tail wagging. So Liesel was my second transport. As you could tell by the person's accent, she was found on the side of the road and thought to be dead. She was picked up by an animal lover who took her to a shelter, wagging her tail. So she was actually flown from Louisiana to Atlanta by a pilot one evening on a Friday evening. She ended up spending the night with me, and then I flew her from Atlanta to North Carolina, where she's grown up to be a big dog. So I still keep in touch. She's pretty cute. So some of these are lifelong memories. Here's another one where this family up here on the right found Kaiser, the German Shepherd, also on the side of the road in rural Kentucky, and took this dog in, and they realized they just, as much as they loved Kaiser, they couldn't care for him. So they found a rescue by talking to a lot of people up in their area, down in the Tampa area, called Heidi's Rescue, that just works with German Shepherds. And so I went and picked up the dog from Kentucky, flew back to Atlanta, and then had plans to drive down to Florida the next day. So we drove Kaiser in the car, the second leg. So, you know, the rescue groups are really key to a lot of this, right? We wouldn't have the requests if the rescue groups weren't looking for the animals in the shelters that could be adopted, aren't working with fosters and forever homes. And so they're doing a lot of the work, and working with them and coordinating with them has been very rewarding. They're the first line of defense. I worked with a group down in Georgia where we didn't have very much animal control, and there was a woman in Vidalia, Georgia, who just got to be known by everybody. If you find a dog, you take the dog to her, and she would just accumulate the dogs and then work with rescue groups around the area in Florida and in Virginia, and we would help transport those on a regular basis, unfortunately. Some of the coordinators in the rescue groups, they know Pilots and Paws, and they've done it before, and they know all the details. Others are brand new. And when I moved to California a couple of years ago, went to a lot of some of these adoption events and really spread the word, because the goal here is to find more dogs forever homes, eliminate euthanasia, having any animals euthanized. And so, if you know any rescue groups, let them know this is available to them. There's no cost to them. There is some coordination. A lot of times what we see is rescue groups will post to Pilots and Paws at the same time that they're trying to work on a ground transport. So they'll kind of cover their bases, which is fine. I'm all for that. And so if they get a flight, it's obviously much quicker, much easier on the animals. One thing we've done in the Southeast when I lived there a couple years in a row, and I think they're still doing this, and I'd love to bring this to the Bay Area or to California, is they do a regional event. And it's a bit about camaraderie and getting pilots together, which we like to do, helping rescue groups. So most of these scenarios, we actually went and literally emptied a shelter in one day, and we flew out all the animals. Either some were ground transported, but most of them were flown. And so there's a ton of coordination, but it's been a lot of fun to do these events. I participated in these and coordinated the one in Atlanta. Out of some of this there were 2 documentaries made, one called Tales in Flight, which is about pilots and Paws, and A Southern Fix, which is about spay and neuter programs. So both of those were kind of inspired by Pilots and Paws. Let's see how I'm doing on time. So I will just show this last video. It's 2 minutes, and then I'll take questions.
I think we're saving on the planes about between 250 and 300 today, and then by ground probably another 200. So a lot of animals are going to have new and happy lives today.
Okay, you have a safe flight.
Oops. So here's my last photo here. My plane loaded to the gills, as you can see, crates all the way to the roof. This was a big day when we took a lot of dogs, but been very rewarding. It's a big puzzle here. And then this was one very happy puppy going to a forever home. So that's it. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Susan. That was fascinating. That's quite an impact that the organization makes. I mean, 40,000 animals, that's a lot. I do have a bunch of questions that have floated into the chat, so I guess we'll go through them, and some of them are always interesting about what kind of animals you've transported. How about a skunk?
Not yet. Not yet, not that. I have transported a pig one time.
Is there an animal you will not transport, or the organization will not transport, and is that stated anywhere?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that there is. I mean, like I said, in most cases, in my case, everything I've ever transported has been in a crate. Of course, some dogs, are coming from bad situations. And so we always ask the rescues about how they might react. So one of the questions on the website is, how well will this animal transport? Right? And a lot of times they'll say, it's calm, no problem. Or they might say, needs to be on a harness, rescues need to handle the dog or animal if there's any concern, right? So it's just one of those things that you make sure you touch on up front. have those discussions to make sure you're comfortable.
Have you ever had a situation in a flight where an animal was essentially freaking out and you had to abort the flight, or how bad could it get?
I haven't, but I have had, well, I was meeting, I haven't had that. Most of the animals will bark a little bit at the beginning, but for the most part, they're relatively quiet. I have had a situation where I was meeting another pilot in, I believe it was Modesto, and there were three siblings, three dogs, and they were all tethered. Well, one was in a crate, two were tethered in the back of his airplane. So he went to get the ones out that were tethered, and one threw the collar off. And so we had one loose dog out of three. And when I got there, we still had loose dogs. Fortunately, they all wanted to be together, so they stayed together. But it did take us close to an hour and 45 minutes to eventually coax them into my crates, which then we loaded into the plane. But yeah, so that's a risk, and that's one thing we try to avoid. It's happened. We try really hard, especially with those dogs that could throw a collar, that we try to make sure they come with harnesses or things like that.
And obviously, issues of weight and balance have to be taken into account.
Absolutely.
Do you have a situation where if animals are moving around that they need to be tranquilized, or is there any? Are they just set in their cages and ready to go?
Yeah, in most cases, they're in the crate, and in my case, they're always in the crate, and sometimes they're maybe not in the biggest crate that they would like, but they're they're on a rescue flight, right? And so there have been times when I've fit dogs together and put them in smaller crates than maybe they would like to, and I wouldn't ever want to do that except for the fact that it might just be for an hour and a half, right? And to get them to someplace better. But no, I've had it, sometimes some of the dogs might be given some medicine if they think, from the rescue or whatever, to calm them. We do try to have the rescues not feed them breakfast, usually if it's a morning flight and those kinds of things, but it hasn't been a problem.
I see in our audience, we have several pilots. I recognize them, and they may be wondering, what are your pilot credentials, and what are the required minimum credentials needed to be a Pilots and Paws pilot? And is there a certain rating that you must have, or what's that situation?
We're pretty easy on that. I know there are some other groups that have some restrictions, but we accept pretty much anybody. So I am private instrument rated, but I work with a lot of pilots that are VFR only. Of course, you have to work around weather, and you have to plan for that. But yeah, you can own your own plane. You can rent a plane. You can be VFR, IFR, single engine twin. It can be anything. I do like to remind those that rent airplanes, because I used to rent an airplane, that you need to make sure you check with your flight school or whoever you're renting the airplane from, and your agreement that you might have signed maybe many years ago that might say you will not transport animals. And so that was a scenario where I was renting. I worked it out with the owners of the flight school, that I would always keep them in crates and those kinds of things, and we worked it out. But you want to make sure you don't violate one of those agreements. So make sure you check with your flight school or where you rent from.
On these big flights that you've flown with a lot of rescues, are these essentially formation flights? Or, I mean, are you departing in large groups, or do you do any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, you could see from that video, or if you're a pilot, you probably paid attention to the fact that it was very foggy. And it was very foggy for way past the time when we were supposed to depart. There were a few pilots that went. Most pilots did not. We waited till the fog lifted to be safe. If we had any issues on takeoff, that we could get back to the airport relatively easy, even if we were IFR. A lot of pilots chose to wait. So we waited, and of course, as soon as the fog lifted, we did have a long line at the end of the runway, but no, it wasn't formation flying. Some of the flights were going south, some were going north, so it was a variety of directions of where the planes were going. So no, we just took off on our own flight plans.
So when you're doing your flight planning and looking at weather, is really turbulence the issue you're looking at? It's not so much whether it's IFR, but whether it's going to be a bumpy ride, or is that a factor for the animals?
Yeah, I mean, I don't worry too much about the animals from that perspective. Yes, they might get sick, but in my case, they're in a crate and I can clean that up pretty easily. Obviously, I'm worried about my own personal limitations on turbulence. Um, and here in California, there are some airports that can get socked in along the bay, all up and down the coast. And so we want to make sure that we pick, a lot of times when I'm meeting pilots, sort of halfway between LA and San Jose, trying to pick airports that we hope won't be foggy in the morning, because a lot of times we're doing this in the morning, right? So, and I work with some VFR pilots from the LA area, so we work it out.
What would you say the percentage of the flights are that are just one leg, or how many are multiple legs that require more than one pilot? What's kind of the frequency of
Yeah, I would say here in California, it's probably about 40% are one leg, and I'd say 60% are probably more than one leg. And that, of course, depends on how far you're willing to fly. So like I mentioned, I've done a bunch of flights between LA and the Bay Area, or a lot of times LA and Napa, Sonoma, that area. And so I'll do half of the leg and I'll meet a pilot halfway. I have had that same situation where I just agreed to do the whole thing because it was a nice day, or in one situation, the pilot I was supposed to meet had an airplane issue that morning, and I opted to just go ahead and do the leg and get the dog to where they needed to go. So, it was a long day for me, but it was a long day in an airplane. That's always a good day.
You fly a Bonanza. I was just curious, of all the volunteer pilots for Pilots and Paws, what's the swankiest, fastest, highest flying airplane that someone's volunteered to move an animal around?
I think I've been involved with somebody who had like a Pilatus, which was pretty nice. There was a lot of extra space for a lot more dogs. But yeah, every once in a while you come across somebody with something pretty fancy.
So nobody in a Gulfstream is
no, not that way. Not that I've been involved in.
Well, I'm looking at the chat box here, the group chat, and I think we've hit most of the questions. If anyone has another question, be sure to type it in. Otherwise, what we're going to do is wrap up here. And I'd like to thank our guest, Susan Delgado from Pilots and Paws, for being our guest tonight. And you can show your appreciation to her by using the reaction button at the very bottom of your Zoom screen and give her a thumbs up or a hand clap so that she knows you appreciated her talk.
Yeah, join us. I'd love to get more Bay Area pilots and rescues involved and helping get animals to their forever homes. So it's a lot of fun.
And that's pilotsandpaws.org. What's the website?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Pilotsandpaws.org. So that's what you want to check out if you want to get into this interesting mission flying, which is always a good thing to give structure to your aviation. So again, thank you, Susan. I appreciate you joining us tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody 2 weeks from tonight for our next Hangar Talk, sponsored by Provident Credit Union, in which we'll be joined by Scott Heighton and photographing aircraft. So that'll be on September 9th. So thanks, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Good night. Mr. Bass, see you later.